I'm Jim Czek with Kelowna Now. I have with me Ian Burns, our managing editor, on the phone with me all the way from the beautiful capital of Canada, Ottawa. Morning.
Howdy.
Well, let's get right at it. I got the pleasure of actually, you set this interview up, of interviewing Liberal Housing Minister Sean Fraser, right?
Yeah, and it was quite a for a minister, one of the most powerful people in Canada. It was quite a long interview, wasn't it? About 15 minutes.
Yeah, we got 15 minutes with him, and we talked about because obviously he had had some dialogue with our mayor Tom Dias here in regards to the housing accelerator fund, and then the Pierre Poilievre's government is pushing the GST instead. But prior to that interview, I was actually speaking with the head of Habitat for Humanity, and he said that the Liberals had done such a good job with rental housing. We've seen that effect here in Kelowna. That why don't they do that with the building houses? Remove the GST from building homes as well, and that's one of the platforms that Pierre Poilievre is talking about, and they seem to be an either or. The Liberals want to continue with the HA, the Housing Accelerator Fund, and Poilievre says he wants to scrap it and do the no GST. And I asked the question is why not do both? And that's what the Habitat for Humanity guy says as well.
Yeah, well, Fraser's answer was uh, something along the lines of, it's a lot of money, and we can't just say yes to everything. We do have to be careful. He said, it's not my money, it's taxpayers' money. But yeah, it's a very complicated crisis, isn't it? And that's what your interview with the Habitat for Humanity chap sort of laid out, just how difficult it is. And he kind of said there is no silver bullet as well, didn't he? But he did he said that the GST cut would certainly make a quick impact.
Yeah, no, I think that was one of the things that he said that would be really helpful, and that's what Pierre Poilievre is saying as well. So politics aside, like I pressed this point with Sean Fraser several times. Why not do both? If we've seen such good results in the rental market with removing the GST, why don't we do the same? And if it is such a priority for Canadians, why wouldn't we do both?
Yeah, he did also say though we should mention, though people should watch the interview as well. But he did say that they're looking at other tax options. So
Yeah.
that was kind of in politics speak. That was a hint that that was kind of him saying maybe, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, because he did seem agreeable when I first mentioned it, when I pressed on it to kind of get a confirmation, and then he kind of backpedaled away from it. But I do think that we need to take politics out of it. And good interview with Sean Fraser, and then also I think a really good interview with Pedro from Habitat from Humanity, right?
Yeah, very good National Housing Week coverage from us, I think, so far.
Yeah, and the story you put together, because you weaved all of that together. Like, there's a great story in Colorado right now where you've taken the interview from Sean Fraser, the interview with Pedro, the interview with Tom Dias that we've done, and then also some video from Pierre Poilievre, and weaved it into a really good story. And like you said, on National Housing Week, a story well worth reading. And plus, there's 4 videos in there that people can watch, right?
Yeah, it's a good way to learn about, if I may say so myself, a good way to learn about a very complicated, intractable problem that seems to just never go away.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, Kelowna Now, being a small regional outlet, has done, I think, a really good job in trying to put together a more comprehensive story, and getting some thoughts from a bunch of different people, especially like regarding our local market as well.
Yeah.
Tooting our own horn there.
Well, nobody else is going to toot it.
Yeah. Um, and then we did talk also, one of the other bigger issues that faces especially rural and the smaller communities in British Columbia is access to emergency rooms. And we did talk to the Oliver Mayor that's faced over 40 closures now for the Oliver ER department. And that was a really good interview too. You set that one up. He says he's very hopeful that after this interview that he's going to get some calls from the new health minister, Josie. but he says
Well, maybe
he's gonna wait by the phone.
maybe she'll deign to give us an interview. That would be nice. That would be an improvement on her predecessor.
Yeah, we should reach out to Adrian Dixon, ask if he'll do an interview for the energy and what's the other one he's looking after? Energy and is it energy and mines or
Climate change, yeah.
energy and climate change, and see if he's willing to do an interview now. But yeah, we should definitely reach out to Josie because this is an ongoing issue. It sounds like they've been trying a bunch of different things, definitely in Oliver, to try to get some physicians to kind of relocate there. I mean, it's not a bad area to live, right? Oliver is beautiful, but it's the access to housing is what seems to be their biggest issue.
You would think that it was probably more affordable there, certainly than the Lower Mainland.
Yeah, they just don't have any like newer homes being built, I guess, and the property is so they say that maybe the government's going to cough up some of its lands that it owns so that they can convert that to housing.
Yeah, well, whatever it takes, I guess, because it's just that's another situation like housing that just can't continue, really. It can't continue being this bad, I think, for the sake of societal
Well, I mean, if we
cohesion. And
if all levels of government are looking at it and they made it this priority, which should have been a priority a long time ago, um, and if they can't solve it, maybe it's time to have a different government. It's because it's like you have to be able to solve it, right?
yeah, well, we just had an election, didn't we? And apparently people are content to allow the same government to go at it, but yeah,
Uh,
possibly a change coming in the federal area.
yeah, and then in Ukraine, Canada closes its embassy in Ukraine as the U.S. warns of potential significant air attack, and it seems like and then they just made another. I think we talked about it prior to going on. Is that the United States now says they can use landmines and stuff like that too, right? So it seems like the Joe Biden administration is providing all the permission they need to escalate this war, and it sounds like it's getting escalated for closing. It's not Canada's not the only one closing their embassy, right?
Yeah, several countries. But I mean, I would say from the Ukrainian perspective and the Western supporters of Ukraine, they wouldn't see that as an escalation on the part of Ukraine or on themselves. They would say that what is happening is the Russians are succeeding in the east, in the Donbass area, and they're afraid that the Eastern Front might collapse. That's what some analysts have said. So I guess rather than escalation, it's kind of like panic stations. It's emergency, isn't it? It's like we have to protect that Eastern Front.
And we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but I did sit down with the Friends of Ukraine from Kelowna here, and we had an interview yesterday as well, but I think it's coming up a little bit later here. The city in Yukon at a standstill as the mayor and council refused to pledge allegiance to King Charles. You're
Yeah,
from jolly old England. What do you say to that?
I find it. I mean, as a youngin, as a kid, I was like very hostile to the monarchy, but I think you kind of just grow to get used to it. But I mean, their rationale is that the monarchy, the crown, was bad, behaved badly towards indigenous people once upon a time, and therefore it seems wrong to pledge allegiance. But I mean, when I did my Canadian citizenship exam, a great deal of that concerns the importance of the monarchy in Canada. And any constitutional student, anybody that's looked at the Canadian Constitution knows that the crown is all important, even though that's a bizarre thing because it's in another country, but it's absolutely central to the entire Canadian political structure. So if you have people that refuse to pledge allegiance to it, that certainly makes things difficult.
Yeah, I'm just going to leave that there. I don't really have an opinion that I want to share on the monarchy. Um, Canadian cities forced to build housing for asylum seekers. Again, we talk about housing as homeless shelters overflow. Close to 250,000 asylum claims are in the system as of September 30th. Again, this is that thing that's added pressure. When I also pressed Sean Fraser because he was the immigration minister on the amount of immigration that we've been allowing into this country that has put pressure. Obviously, you can see it, the pressure that's on our if they're having to build housing for asylum seekers, where's the housing for Canadian citizens? Still there, Ian? Did we lose Ian somewhere?
Can you hear
Hmm.
me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You're back.
That was an emergency alert test on my phone.
Oh, there you go. So it's successful, right? So anyway, we were talking about again more housing, close to 250,000 asylum seekers. Lots of pressure there to build housing for asylum seekers, but like there should be just as much pressure to build housing for Canadian citizens.
Yeah, it's a real shame that a lot of these people end up in the homeless shelters, don't they? And it kind of like renders them redundant. It's a very strange situation. But then you have a lot of controversies, and you know this is almost certainly at some point going to arrive in the Okanagan as well, where they build these temporary structures for asylum seekers, and it's an awkward situation because almost nobody wants that in their neighborhood. So then you have these like very unpleasant arguments between different communities about where it should go.
And then the next one, there's a lot of immigrants end up leaving Canada anyway. They just think it's not that great here. I mean, I remember being in Vegas recently talking to a cab driver that was from Europe, and he said that from what he understands, why would anybody want to go to Canada? And I did watch a piece this morning from um, this nomad capitalist where he helps people relocate, especially with a lot of people saying they want to leave the United States because Trump won on where to go. And, lots of people, he says, say Canada, and he says that'd be the worst place to go. So based on a whole bunch of reasons, like Canada is definitely, if you do your research, he said, is definitely not on the list of places where you'd want to go.
Well, I would disagree with that, obviously. I came here, but
You didn't do
yeah,
your research, obviously.
yeah, clearly it should have well, ChatGPT didn't exist then for me to
There you go.
to debate that. But no, I think yeah, there are huge problems, aren't there? And the economy and productivity, per capita GDP, and so on, and housing and health. These are big crises right
High
now.
taxes,
But
weather.
yeah, I would submit that the weather in Canada is actually better than in my homeland of England because there's more sunshine here. So, but that's a different argument.
Yeah.
But certainly, if you compare Canada to Europe, which is starting, it still has beautiful streets and culture, museums and cities and stuff. But Europe's trajectory is extraordinarily bleak, I think, right now. And when you look at things like youth unemployment in a lot of these beautiful countries like Italy, Europe's seen much, much better days. And I think in comparison to Europe, Canada looks pretty strong. Particularly when you think of one of the most important things is energy, and Canada, you know, theoretically should never run out of energy in its own territory,
I'm
whereas
glad
Europe
you
is
put that
now
word theoretically
struggling.
in there. Because
Yeah, right. There are ways to ruin that situation. But in Europe, they're scrabbling around like desperate fools, trying to find a way to,
we
keep
we
their power
squander our
systems going.
resources and they would beg for them. Well, they have been begging for them.
Yep, and they've been told to go beg somewhere else.
Yeah, because we're not taking it out of the ground, um, because of some strange reason. Maybe we should ask Danielle Smith what that reason is. Um, I think she has the answer. And then this other one, Pierre Polyev, that says he's been restricting his MPs, and this is the CBC did this and painted him as an extraordinarily dark picture of the Conservative Party of Canada. No
Yeah,
bias there, right?
well worth reading.
What's that?
Well worth reading, I would say, because what we didn't mention about that interview with Sean Fraser is that it does pertain to two Kelowna MPs, but mostly Dan Albas, who sent off a letter about the Housing Accelerator Fund. But he also has had arguments in the House of Commons with Tracy Gray. And essentially, Sean Fraser's argument, and the argument of increasingly now the argument of the Liberal Party, is that the Conservatives are almost like living under a dictatorship, and that they're being told exactly what to do and they can no longer advocate for their own ridings. And this article, it's quite germane to that theory. I think it seems to show that up quite a bit,
And
that
as
Polyev is
opposed to the
like really
liberals,
wants to
where
control
everybody
his
gets to
team.
speak and say their peace of mind and everything, right?
Well, that's the comedy, that's the comic element, isn't it? Where it's that's coming from the Liberal Party, where things aren't exactly it's not exactly a debating society, is it, in the Liberal Party either?
Yeah, no, a bit of comic relief there for sure.
But I would
Um,
say as well, when you read this article, another bit of context is politics is an extremely ugly business, as anybody that's come even slightly close to it knows. I mean, in my personal experience, working in England and Canada, it's repulsive. It's horrible. The culture is absolutely disgusting, and that's kind of the way it's always been. So I just think, what do you expect, really? That would be that's the context I would add to that when you read that story is, were you expecting different in politics? Because that's how it's always been. So
yeah. And then I did that interview with Dennis there, and 1,000 days. It's a good interview to go watch. There's a couple of videos in there that he played for us, and he says you can walk around. There was an honoring of the 1,000 days in Kiev yesterday, but he says you can walk around in Kiev right now, and it's only women and children and really old people, men, because if between 18 and 60, there's no men. They're all fighting, so or dead.
yeah, tragic that, isn't it? I mean, some of them have also just run away, I guess,
Fled,
and
yeah.
that's also true in Russia.
And we did talk about a lot of things. We did talk about Trump. We did talk about, how some of the more affluent in Ukraine have figured out a way so that their sons don't go to the war. And, like they found, doctors that have been signing these releases that have had, large sums of money found in their apartments and stuff like that too, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine, like, going back in time to before the war, Russia used to almost always come out very close to the bottom of transparency studies. It was always considered to be just about the most corrupt country in the world, and then the only country, or at least in Europe, that was considered more corrupt was Ukraine. So I mean, it's not really a surprise that this kind of thing goes on. Ukraine has had an extremely difficult, you know, few decades. I think actually longer than that, isn't it? It's a country that's had a terrible recent history, and it continues, unfortunately.
I would recommend people go and watch that video just to kind of get an understanding of what's going on there right now. And things have escalated, so things are getting scarier. Supposedly, again, I'm going to go back to that. Donald Trump has promised to end this thing before he takes office or the day he takes office. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. The BC Port Union challenges the constitutionality of the Labour Minister's back to work order. He's saying get back to work and binding arbitration, and they're saying no, it violates their rights, Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
It's a hard one to find a balance there, isn't it? Because it's also happening in Montreal,
Yeah,
and Montreal and Vancouver. If both of those ports are closed, then it's almost like effectively Canada's kind of closed, really, in terms of
yeah.
shipping access. So, I mean, in terms of things in the national interest, you can't get more serious, really, than these strikes. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one.
And closer to home, Kelowna City Council, you're not allowed to have your cell phone when you're in chambers. What do you think of that? That the teacher said no more cell phones.
Yeah, it's happening in schools, isn't it? That's for sure.
Happening everywhere. Obviously, people can't control themselves, right? So, it's getting some pushback on that, though. So,
Well, there's a lot to be said for their place in our society, phones, because we haven't. They're so new still, aren't they, that we haven't quite been able to figure out like an etiquette, like a social system that governs their use. So yeah, I'm not surprised that this has happened, and I imagine that once we figure it out, assuming that there's not some kind of even more intrusive technology, that
well,
that things will be
it's
a bit
weird though
smoother.
that I think they all have computer terminals there, so couldn't they be messaged on those as well, as opposed to just on their phones?
Yeah, do WhatsApp web. That's maybe the key for them.
I don't know. Seems odd. And then coming to Kelowna, the CCMA Awards, and we put out a story this morning that you can get a code, and so you can get in line there for the pre-sale code there. So the CCMA, the big deal, September 3rd, 2025, right? The Canadian Country Music Awards. I'm not up for one this year, but
What, your banjo solos have not been recognized?
but there's probably some people that we know of that we've maybe even interviewed here. There's quite a few, Tegans and that we've done a lot of interviews with, right? So Ben Click, a lot of good country singers that are local here too, right? So, are you a big country music fan, or
I actually, believe it or not, I actually am a huge country fan, but
there you go?
nothing modern, but going back a number of years, yeah.
See, there you go. There's the cell phone going off. If only I had some rules.
That's that's Willie Nelson, isn't it?
There
He
you
wants
go.
in.
Um, and then Starship launched yesterday. Uh, and then they had in attendance, they had Elon obviously was there, but he had the president-elect there and a bunch of his staffers, and we were going to run this video of that the biggest Starship lifting off here, right? And that Starship is the equivalent, has as much thrust as, you can play that video, as 66 Boeing 747s. Any sound with that? Or? There you go. So they were all in attendance watching. It was a successful launch. They did not try to capture the booster with the claws, or whatever they call them, the arms to get it back. You can probably cut it there. And then we got another little new feature here. This is a good one for Ian to comment on. The meme of the day. Here's the meme of the day, and it says Europe has AI regulations without any AI companies. Europe has crypto regulations without any cryptocurrencies. Europe wants to censor social media without any social media companies. And it just asked if you notice the pattern there. They're really good at regulations.
They're good at talk as well, aren't they? They're good at bureaucracy and they're good at chatting, but you know, when the rubber hits the road, as they say, the EU is essentially hopeless and useless, isn't it?
Yeah, so they're showing
It's not
bare
fit
shelves.
for
I
this
mean,
world right now.
what has Europe contributed as far as technology goes in the past little while that you can think of? Because like if
Spotify is Swedish, isn't it?
is it? I don't know.
Yeah, I think Spotify. I mean, if you count Britain as Europe, then that contributes quite a lot. It's got quite a sort of flourishing AI sector in Britain, and biochemistry and things like that. But for the sake of this meme, at least, we shouldn't count Britain because it's not in the EU.
That's correct.
I don't know really. I mean, they certainly don't have a shortage of like mega brains in Europe. I mean, some of the oldest universities in the world, some extremely smart people, but they kind of seem to end up in California, don't they? That's their big
Well, I
problem.
mean, the automobile sector is really hurting. Ford just announced they're going to pull back dramatically out of Europe. They're going to do massive layoffs in Europe. Volkswagen talking about closing, like they were talking, Volkswagen, one of the biggest automakers in Europe, closing 3 plants and curtailing. And the same is going on with a lot of the other automakers. And that was one of their biggest things is the European automakers were seen as the what we call the high watermark, right? Mercedes and BMW and like Porsche and Ferrari and like some of the higher end brands, right?
Yeah, but they missed the boat, didn't they, on EVs? And they also made two desperately stupid gambles. One was that Russia would be a reliable supplier of energy, and Two was that the Chinese would be reliable consumers of their exports. Both of those have vanished
Yeah,
into
so
thin air,
China
haven't
is
they?
the largest, it's even bigger than the United States, the largest automobile market in the world now. And basically, most of the legacy automakers are closing their factories in China because China's population is mainly buying EVs. Over 50% are buying EVs, and there's a lot of Chinese brands there now. I mean, they've invited all those automakers in there, including Tesla, to start making cars, and they learn very well. And now they're making cars better than most of the legacy automakers at way cheaper, better, faster, right?
Yeah, I mean, we should say though that it's not a uniquely European vulnerability, is it? I mean, there are certainly some American companies that are vulnerable as well to that Chinese demand, aren't they? Like Apple is one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
They would be in a pretty desperate situation if, if there was an equivalent trend in the phone market in China.
Well, I
But
mean,
obviously in
things
Canada as
are
well. I mean, a lot
moving.
of agricultural companies depend on China too, don't they?
Yeah, I mean they build buildings really fast. Their solar technology leads the world. I mean, they're putting up solar farms that are massive. They're putting up SMRs. They're switching their energy focus faster than probably anybody in the world. Like from to a more diversified, where they were heavily reliant on coal right from Australia to diversifying away from coal. And it's got the Australians very worried that they can't sell their coal anywhere because China's moving towards solar and wind and SMRs and all these and plus like the access to the LNG from Russia and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, though they are still major consumers of coal, aren't they? But the difference between them and Europe, for example, is that they said they're going to build solar panels, they're going to build wind, they're going to go into sort of renewable energy, but simultaneously they're increasing their consumption in many parts of the country of coal because
Yep.
they're not going to hobble themselves. They're going to do it in a way that benefits China,
Well, they've
which I
said
think the
that.
Europeans didn't do.
They've said that the Chinese leader has said that they will not, unlike ours, will not um, hurt their population based on climate change goals. They will do whatever is necessary to raise their people up from levels of poverty. That's their first priority.
Yeah, and I mean it's also kind of if you read analyses of China, it's like the Communist Party's um, existence kind of depends on that. That it's kind of like a contract between the Chinese people and the Communist Party is that their lives will improve in a material fashion, and in exchange for that, they'll be ruled over by essentially a dictatorship. So I guess
Yeah,
it's life or death really for the Chinese elite.
yeah. In the financial markets, we don't have any graphics to show you, but Bitcoin continues to tear. Bitcoin at like 94,000 US right now, and in Canadian dollars, 132,000. Just continues to bang on that door of 100,000. We'll likely see that 100,000 before the new year even, right? It doesn't take much now for it to kind of just get another leg, right? Like $3, $4, $5,000 move. It doesn't seem unusual in the Bitcoin market. Gold recovering as well, up $31 in Canadian funds today, up 17 in U.S. funds. Gold, at 26.49 last check, right? So the markets again continue to show favor to the new Trump administration.
Yeah, well, they're expecting tax cuts, I suppose.
I think they're expecting a more favorable business environment in general, right? Less regulation. I think that's the biggest thing that when I listen to them talk about the markets is that their biggest thing is that less regulation, more innovation, and definitely the support of all the tech sectors. And Nvidia is about to report today too, and that'll be a bellwether for what's going on in the markets. And Nvidia, if it reports strong, it could be another big lift from here, right? So, I mean, that's
They're
been,
already riding high, aren't they?
yeah, Nvidia has been on a tear. One of the most by market cap, the richest company in the world. And it looks like everybody needs NVIDIA chips, right? So to kind of compete in this AI world, right? So
Yeah, it's one of those multi-trillion-dollar market caps, isn't it, that they have in America? Just astonishing levels of and
and you know,
astonishing assets that they have.
yeah, and then the same thing. And NVIDIA is very, their CEO is very favorable of Tesla, and like all these tech companies. If you look at Tesla, they're leading in so many different categories. Technology is one of the things that the Americans definitely have over most countries, right? Like they have some of the biggest tech companies in the world, right?
Yeah, well, essentially, you might as well say all of them, really. That's kind of how it is, isn't it? Obviously, there are some rivals here and there, but the Chinese, that's kind of one of their weak points is they tried to steal it all, but it's quite hard. It's one thing to steal like blueprints, there's another thing to actually make them into something real. And I
Yeah, I
think they
think
kind of
that
struggle, don't they?
the Chinese companies are going to face some headwinds with the Trump administration. They're talking today about forcing the delisting of all Chinese-related companies off the U.S. stock exchanges, which
It's, I mean, America's not exactly in a situation where they can fire all the shots and not take anything back, though. I mean, China could really harm the American economy in retaliation, couldn't it? So I feel
yeah,
like,
no,
as with the other cases, it'll be a negotiation.
they're interrelated for sure. But they're saying one of the arguments is that they don't have to follow the same like accounting guidelines that American listed companies. So why do they get the benefit of listing on the U.S. exchanges and get access to American capital if they don't follow the same rules and guidelines? And I think the number one mandate for Chinese companies, if there's any military benefit to the Chinese government, that's their first obligation is to the Chinese military.
Yeah, and we've seen that happen in I think it was Brazil, wasn't it? It was kind of like strip mined of all of its technological advances, many of them that could be applied to military sector, and then they suddenly all emerged in China. I mean, the Chinese have been doing this for a very long time. That's why a lot of people were very upset when they were sort of allowed into the family of trading nations, into the WTO and whatnot.
Yes, it'll be interesting. Like as we move towards January 20th, it says this, like there's more picks coming out from the Trump administration to follow along there. David Eby didn't play the right playbook. He should be just trickling them out one at a time, like Trump. Instead, he just laid them all out there. And
I'm not sure they have the reputations to justify that.
and then obviously everybody's a winner in the BC cabinet. Everybody gets money. Yours and mine. So, yeah, we continue to watch, right? So, again, stories worth reading for sure. Ian did a really good job on that housing story. So go and read that. And there's a bunch of videos in there as well. So that's if you got some time today, go and read that because housing obviously is our biggest concern for many Canadians, and then so. It lays out some things in housing there, right? So we even talked interest rates when I talked to Sean Fraser. We talked about a lot of different things in there. So anything else you want to add today, Ian?
No, I think we've as usual, it's been an adventure, hasn't it? China and housing and everything.
We've been around the world.
I think we've done our job.
We've been around the world, so there you go. We thank, and the traffic, we forgot to mention the traffic flowing east and west. It's a little hazy out there. Or not hazy, I shouldn't say, but a little cloudy. And, looks like, snow wants to keep creeping down that hillside. So see if we can keep it off the valley floor for a while. And then the Big White's open. So get your skis shined up and get your winter tires on and head up to the hill. With that said, we thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.